longer presentation now because as some of you are aware, I'm going to be teaching this year. I'm going to teach an online immersion for those who are serious about studying handreading, and I mean properly serious, not just an interest, but who actually really want to understand what hands show and how to understand how to work with them and how to work with people and how to unlock the secrets of the hand. I've taught hundreds and hundreds of people over the years, but and some of them are very famous now and have been doing handreading for over 30 years. It's a long and difficult study, but you've got to start in the right kind of place and you've got to have the right kind of information. So if you're interested in actually studying handreading properly and not just as a hobby or a sort of part-time interest, then send me an email and we can talk about that. The course is starting on the 20th of May, so it's about a month's time, and enrollments are already happening. So if you want to get involved with that, then give me a call, drop me an email. Now I'm teaching it online because probably, as you know, I live in New Zealand, and it's a bit difficult to get to New Zealand for most people. But part of what I'm going to be doing in the teaching is I'm going to be reproducing my books. And in the 1990s, I wrote 15 books on handreading, and there's a couple of others that didn't get written, which were kind of started but not finished. And of all of those books, a few of them have been online since 2001. The most famous of that, of course, being the history of Cheirology. The history of handreading book is something that I wrote over about a 5-year period between 1989 and 1994. And it was an extraordinary period of time, really, for me, researching all that in the Bodleian Library at Oxford University. You know, as a compendium and a compilation of the history of handreading going back to the 12th century in Europe anyway, and to give an overview and a flavour of what the origins of modern handreading are, what the preoccupations of medieval palmists were, and why many people's understanding of handreading hasn't changed since the 15th century. It also shows that the handreading isn't as old as people think it is. We have no written proof of the quality of the work done in ancient Greece or in ancient Rome or even in India and China, although we know there's enough evidence to say that there was some kind of handreading practice going on in those places in those times, with the content of which has been lost to us. Nobody really knows what that was about. And the fragments that do have remained that we do know about show that it wasn't particularly erudite or significant in any kind of way. So let me just fiddle around with the camera. So I'm going to just show you, going to take you kind of guided tour of the books that I've got. So I'm now going to move this onto my phone. I'm going to pin this one here so you can see what I'm going to show you in the books that I'm going to show you. So I'm going to use my phone as a camera to look at the books. So the first book I want to talk about is the history of Cheirology. So the history of Cheirology basically is a 65,000 word essay on the history and development of handreading. And this has been online since 2001, and has actually also been translated into Russian and published as a hardback book in Russia. It's a long book with a lot of details in it, a lot of coming from the medieval period to the Renaissance period, covering Rothman and Flood and Don John and the Giant, right through to the revivals of Da Pontigny and Desbordes in the 19th century. And I look at some contemporary, i.e. 20th century handreaders as well. And this book kind of span off at least 3 other books. So there was the book of the early chiromantic manuscripts. Now this book basically is also online on my website as well, and it's basically what it is. It's a kind of representation of some of the earliest texts that can be found in these libraries. So it's like illustrations from manuscripts that are found in the Bodleian Library. As you can see, these are quite fantastical hands, quite fantastical markings, lots of crosses, given the theological significance of a cross. That's not surprising. But also the earliest extant text on handreading what's the so-called Edwine Psalter from Canterbury from 1192. And again, the contents of the Digby manuscripts and the contents of the Meatham manuscript. So, and the Digby Roll IV. So these are all difficult texts to get hold of because they all live in these obscure libraries around the world, but particularly these are from Oxford. So if you're interested in actually reading all the medieval texts and what they were about, well, you can actually do that. You don't have to go to the libraries. You can go to my website. And also, there's a very detailed bibliography there of all the kind of historical texts and manuscripts that I found and in different universities around in England, in the British Museum, in the Bodleian Library, and so on and so forth. So this is a compendium of early chiromantic manuscripts that are otherwise unavailable and difficult to get hold of. So if you want to read those are also on my website, handreading.nz. Now, there's an earlier version of the History of Cheirology. This one was a shorter version. So there's a precede version of that. There's a bibliography. So I also, and then when I did this book, I compiled a complete bibliography of every book that I read on hand at that time. And that's including all different languages: Indian palmistry, Spanish language, French language, scientific researches into fingerprints, medical texts on the hand, the 16th century chiromantii, or some academic references. Is a complete bibliography. Everything that you need to study the hand in detail, at least up to 1995 anyway. It hasn't been updated since then. So, but everything you need, if you want to find out all the books that are available, here's your list, a complete chirological bibliography. And in the vein of the bibliography, I also did two books which I donated to the Bodleian Library in Oxford, and this is just a catalogue of works on palmistry and hands kept in the Bodleian Library in Oxford, and that's the entire University Library of Oxford. And then a very more specific volume to deposit in the Duke Humphreys Library. And the Duke Humphreys Library is the library where all the medieval and Renaissance texts are held, all the scrolls and all the really, really old books that are 400, 500, 600 years old are all kept in this particular library. So this is all the manuscripts that I found in that particular library, and it's kind of got with a little sort of short discussion of the content of the book. In this case, Richard Saunders, Palmistry, the Secrets Thereof Disclosed, London, 1664, with the Bodleian reference number. So if anybody wants to go to the Bodleian Library again, you don't have to search through all the reference in the catalogue system, which obviously back in those days was all done by hand anyway. Palmistry, the Secrets Thereof Disclosed, Ashmole 654 or Ashmole 656. That's easy to find. So there's 6 books that I wrote on the history of handreading and bibliographies and stuff like that. So that's a major part of the work that I did between 1989 and 1994. And as I say, all of these books are in the public domain. I'm quite aware that the problem with this kind of material is it's not particularly public worthy. People don't want to publish that sort of thing. There's not very much call for it, so there's not much interest in it. But if you are interested in that, you're serious, you can find all of that online at my website. All right, so there's a few other things that I did which are worth talking about again. Most of the books that I wrote were study guides for students, and that's the kind of the next collection that I've got here. The next collection that I've got here is basically the half a dozen or so books that I wrote for my students. So this one is called The Beginner's Guide to the Hand. So this is probably my most popular book. It was published in 1994. And I made it basically available as my kind of course handbook for students. If you look at someone like Jenni Hirsch, she She references this in her books. This is one of the textbooks that she used in writing her books. And this basically covers everything in the hand. So it starts off on the elements and chiromorphogamy, the fingers, hand shapes, skin texture, nails, the lines, the major lines, the, Buddhism and chirology, the thumb, and finger phalanges assessment, minor lines, and various appendices. And this was basically the book that basically gave the structure to the correspondence course that I taught in the 1990s. Back in the day, we did that on tape cassette. So people like Jenni Hirsch and Lynn Seal and Talma Brill actually learnt by me sending them a tape cassette of a particular meeting, a talk, a lecture, and then they'd listen to that and they'd have to answer some questions and come back to me. Those of you who are familiar with Jenni Hirsch's book will probably recognize this particular handprint. This is some of the handouts that I gave in my correspondence course back in the day. Somehow made its way into Jenni Hirsch's book, not sure how. Anyway, the Beginner's Guide to Hand was what we call the foundation diploma, and a lot of that material pertains particularly to the Cheirological Society and needs some editing out. But that, in conjunction with this one, studies for the intermediate diploma, are the two books that basically make up the course that I'm teaching now. This one is more of a collection of different themes and essays. So it talks about the anthropological significance of the hand, the assessment of hand shapes from the point of view of vocational analysis, skin texture. We've got more work on the elements and the 5 levels of analysis, and some detailed considerations on metaphysics of the hand, subsidiary lines, and so on and so forth. So that's a really important book, collection of studies in that book as well, also put out in 1994. So these two together kind of combined to make a very specific sort of worksheets. And then the next one I would include in that is the interpretation of dermatoglyphic patterns. Johnny Fincham tells me this is the best book on hand reading ever written. He absolutely loves this book. Way before God-given glyphs even appeared on the planet. You can see this was written in 1992. It's published in 1992. It was actually written in 1991. It's a complete study on fingerprint patterns, which in that point in the Cheirological Society had never been done. So it talks about the history of dermatoglyphics. It talks about dermatoglyphic terminology, using the scientific models like those with the main ridges and the triradii. Looking at the anthropology of fingerprint patterns, the distributions of fingerprint patterns amongst different races of people. So a very comprehensive overview of the scientific study of fingerprint patterns, and then an assessment of the psychological significance of all the fingerprint patterns. So this is my own study on the distributions of fingerprint patterns and what fingers they occur on, and the meanings and significance of having an arch or a loop or a whirl on each of the different fingers. So this is a very comprehensive book. It gives you an idea of what all the fingerprint patterns mean and what they mean when they're found on the different fingers. So yeah, what's that? 1991. That's nearly 30 years before God-given glyphs. And also a section on Palmar dermatoglyphic patterns as well. So all the different skin ridge patterns you can find in the palm. And this was actually my advanced Cheirological Society diploma research thesis. You had to produce an original research thesis, and this was based upon my own studies of hand that I looked at, and also, of course, all the scientific literature that I'd been able to look at the University of Oxford, and distilling all that together to produce one comprehensive volume on the nature of the fingerprint patterns and how to interpret them. So that's a really important book. Again, that's going to be part of the course material in this forthcoming course. Some of the other books that I wrote at that time were very specific. I wrote a 30,000 word essay on the headline or the major airline. you know, just while you're at it, you've got to write a book. You've got to write about all the lines. The earth line and the water line didn't quite get there at that time. They fell by the wayside. But yeah, this is a book just about the major airline, basically. So, you know, when you're talking about people talking about the significance of a hand, you know, this is just one line. This is just one line that's been talked about in this one book. You know, like, how can you possibly? I mean, this is probably longer than most palmistry books where they talk about everything. This is just on the one line of the hand, the major airline. So, you know, that's the kind of quality and detail that we're going to go into. Our next book, also from 1992, Cheirological Health Analysis. So this is a book I wrote in a week. I can remember it really well. It was a total inspiration to write this book. I'd done some research in a hospital in East London, where I had the opportunity to look at the hands of some chronically ill people. My partner at the time had a locum as an osteopath in this hospital, so I was able to look at the hand, take the handprints, and then I went away and I assessed their health conditions from their hand. And then, because she had access to the medical records with the blind study, I didn't know who was who, she could confirm or deny the diagnosis that I made from the hand. And I think there were about 20 patients, or maybe 22, and I got like 21 out of 22 completely right. So somewhere I have a write-up of all of these different, all those studies and of those hands, and from the basis of that, that's when I wrote this book. As a confirmation, enough confirmation to show that we're able to work out some of the significances of the different lines from the point of view of health, as you can see there. So yeah, that's another other study. I'm not doing that at the moment. That's not something I'll be teaching shortly. That's a bit too advanced for people, I think. And then another particular pamphlet or booklet that was useful for the Cheirological Society in those days, basically a way of working with the elements in the assessment of the hand, which was quite the way that we did things back in those days. So it's really a kind of an essay on elements and elemental archetypes. So if you know anything like the purpose of love or the Talma de Jong things, you'll understand that that's very superficial compared to this. And then I guess the last set of books that I wrote, well, actually, they're actually well, it's kind of two books and then combined together in one. This is called The Science of the Hand, which is made up of two books called Scientific Dermatoglyphics and The Science of the Palmar Lines. I'll start with this one first because one of the things I wanted to do was write an essay on why the lines aren't folds in the skin. And this is that essay. It's about a 30,000 word essay on the lines and why they're not folds. And looking at the hand. Oh, look at my camera's gone all funny. Whoops, let's go around that way. Let's see if we can turn that around. There we go. And it's doing something weird like that. No, it's just doing itself. This is, and it's all referring to the scientific literature. So it's these two studies were basically looking at the genetics of the hand. That's the science of the hand, and this was the section in the book about the lines. So, for example, when you study hands extensively, and you look at and you get hold of the hands of twins, you can see the dermatoglyphic correlations between the fingerprints in the twins, but also you look at and see the similarities or the differences in the lines as well. And it's quite obvious that there's, and this, just even this example here, there are similarities between the lines of the hands of these two twins along, you know, as there are fingerprints. So if you're going to say the fingerprints are genetic, and you see that replicated in the hands of twins, and then you see similarities in the lines, then the lines must be significant too, and they can't possibly be folds. So it's one argument that the scientific dermatoglyphicists have in their own armory, but they don't even use it and don't even apply it. So they don't even recognize the lines, and they still think of them as folds or creases. when quite clearly their own evidence suggests that they're actually genetic. So this book really is another product of my endeavors in the Bodleian Library. Again, it took a couple of years to write this one. This is, as I write here, the science of the hand being a consideration of scientific investigations into the hands, discussing the classification and distribution of dermatoglyphic patterns and their significance in genetic and chromosomally based disorders, with further sections on the medical significance of the nails and other clinical signs of disease within the feature of the hands, and a detailed consideration of scientific investigations into the palmar lines, showing why they are not merely folds in the skin. So yeah, it's kind of like, yeah, completely comprehensive. So I basically went into the Bodleian Library and just read hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of journals and books on the science of the lines, on Down syndrome, medical journals, anthropological journals, psychiatric journals, strange formations of fingers, like ridges off the end syndrome, skin ridge dissociation, yeah, all the different trisomies. Like these are handprints of people with Down syndrome from my own collection. Other chromosome abnormalities, basically everything that science has had to say about the hands. This is a complete compendium of all the scientific findings about hands and lines and what that shows, with a complete bibliography at the back as well. So this is, again, a completely comprehensive research project that took a couple of years to put together during the 1990s, available as a single volume or in 2 parts. So if we just look at that now, let's get back, just sort out the camera, put that back up there, put that down there, boom. We'll stop that video. The books basically were a summary of all the work that I did. And I said most of them were written in a couple of year period of time between about 1992 and 1994. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 15. Yeah, there's 15 books there. So that's 15 books that I wrote there. And they were all basically privately published for the benefit of the members of the Cheirological Society back in the 1990s. And so these books have not seen the light of day since 1998. So if you're interested in looking at these books and having access to that material, the only way you're going to do that at the moment is by studying with me. So if you want to find out what they contain and all that knowledge, then you just need to give me an email and you can sign up for the course. All the historical stuff, on the other hand, is freely available on the web. Has been since 2001. I've originally on my own website, and then latterly I put it on Johnny Fincham's website for a couple of years. And then I restarted my own websites again. And that's been a very fruitful piece of information, really. And I'm very pleased that people like Alexandra Nagel found it and came to that, and had then used that as a launch pad for her own researches into Julius Spear, and she's done a PhD on Julius Spear and the significant contributions that he's made to handreading, and she's become an expert in the history of handreading in Germany and France circa 1930 to 1945. And that was the intention of putting it out there. You know, as a history of handreading is a very specific branch of knowledge of handreading. But I wanted basically there to be there so that people couldn't say that, oh, you know, handreading is really old. You know, there was a treatise found on an altar to Hermes that, you know, written by Aristotle, and all this stuff, all this kind of nonsense that, you know, the church banned palmistry. Actually, not true at all. All the early palmistry texts were written in monasteries. You know, it's the Indian palmistry is even Indian. I mean, it's another mythology that's, you know, that's not true. The Indian palmistry is all entirely derived from Victorian palmistry following Cairo and Benham. So all these kind of mythologies about the hand and what people think handreading is about. Having that information there means people can't make up stories about the antiquity of handreading or make claims about it. And unfortunately, most people seem to have completely ignored it. I'm a very good friend with Andrew Fitzherbert, and we correspond even today. We've been corresponding for about 30 years now. And he has a much better passion for handwriting history than me. And he and I corresponded a lot in that time period, 92, 94, exchanging information about the history of the hand and various texts that we'd come across. And he wrote a fantastic book called The Palmer's Companion. And if you haven't got that book, you really should get a hold of it. It's one of the best books on handwriting ever written. And I remember corresponding with him, and he was complaining to me. He said, "I've only sold 100 copies of this book." And I said, "Andrew, I can't think of 20 people who would buy that book." It's a very, very specialized thing. And, that book has now become very valuable because it was so rare, even back in the day. But it is a very, very, very valuable resource. And I dedicate the history of handreading to him because, he is absolutely a genius on the history of handreading. It's absolutely his complete obsession and hobby. Andrew has reprinted lots of really old books, including, for example, Cheirology, which is a German woodblock printing book from about 1495, if I remember rightly, by Johannes Hartlieb. And Andrew was a bookbinder, so he was no problem for him to kind of produce facsimile versions of these books and get them published. So if you really want to know about the history of handreading, you need to talk to Andrew Fitzherbert. But in the meantime, an overview of it, which will be probably more detailed than you probably need, can be found on my website at the history and the history pages on the handreading.nz website. So go and have a look at that. All right, so that's a brief summary of the books that I've written, and I've got more coming in my head, that's for sure. So watch this space, and I'll let you know when I actually get some of these books out. But in the meantime, if you want to look at some of those old study texts, give me an email and we can talk about getting you enrolled on the course. All right, like, subscribe, tell your friends. This is the most authoritative web channel on the hand you're anywhere in the world. All right, thank you very much.